The stars above Meridian Reach did not care that a war was ending there. They simply burned cold and silent while thousands of ships tore each other apart in the dark. For 6 years, humanity had fought the Scar hegemony across a dozen star systems. And for 6 years, humanity had been losing. Today, at Meridian Reach, that losing streak was about to become something final. High Marshal Vouth Kesserin stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Devourer of Stars, and watched the last human battle line break apart on his tactical display. Red icons, Scar ships, swarmed around a shrinking cluster of blue icons. What remained of the United Earth fleet? You blinked out, not retreating, dying. Casualties on the human flagship? Kesserin asked, his voice a low rumble that came from a throat built for a species twice the size of a man. The Ares Ascendant has lost primary power. An officer reported her shields are down. She is venting atmosphere from 4 decks. Kesserin allowed himself something close to satisfaction. The Ares Ascendant was humanity's largest warship, the pride of their fleet. And in less than an hour, it would be a dead hulk floating among the wreckage of everything Earth had built to defend itself. After Meridian Reach, there would be nothing left standing between the Scar hegemon and the human home world. No more fleets, no more defenses, just open space and then Earth itself. He had waited a long time for this moment. The Scarn had underestimated humanity once early in the war, and it had cost them dearly. Humans fought like cornered animals, desperate and unpredictable, throwing away ships and lives in ways that made no sense to Scorn commanders trained in careful, disciplined warfare. But desperation was not strategy. 6 years of grinding attrition had worn humanity down to nothing. Their shipyards were bombed. Their colonies were cut off. Their fleet, once numbering in the thousands, was now reduced to the wreckage burning across Meridian Reach. "Signal all ships," Kesserin said. "Finish it. No prisoners among their warships. Let the humans understand once and for all that resistance was always pointless." Aboard the UES Valiant, a Hunter-class cruiser near the edge of the battle, Captain Elena Cross gripped the arms of her command chair so hard her knuckles had gone white. Around her, the bridge crew worked in a controlled panic. Hands flying over consoles, voices clipped and tight. Alarms blared from 3 different systems at once. Somewhere below decks, Chief Engineer Marcus Webb was fighting to keep the reactor from going critical. And from the sound of his voice over the comm, he was losing that fight, too. "Captain, the Ares just lost main power," said Lieutenant Sarah Kim, the Valiant executive officer, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "She's a sitting target now." Elena watched the display, too. The Ares Ascendant had been humanity's flagship, the largest ship ever built by human hands, home to 12,000 crew. Now it drifted, dark and silent while Scar cruisers closed in like sharks smelling blood. "Get me a channel to Admiral Reyes," Elena said. "Trying, Captain." "Comms are." The communications officer paused, listening to something in his earpiece. His face went pale. "Captain, I'm not getting anything from the Ares. Not even a distress beacon." The bridge went quiet except for the alarms. Elena had served under Admiral Reyes for 3 years. She had watched the woman make impossible decisions with a steady hand, always calm, always thinking 3 moves ahead of the enemy. If the Ares had gone dark, it meant something had happened to the command deck. It meant the fleet in the middle of its final battle had just lost its head. "Captain, incoming," the tactical officer shouted. 3 Scarn cruisers breaking formation, vectoring toward us. Elena's mind raced through the numbers. The Valiant was a mid-sized cruiser, fast and well-armed for her class, but she was no match for 3 Scarn cruisers at once, not with her shields already at 60% and dropping. She looked at the display one more time at the wreckage of the human fleet, scattered like broken toys across the battle space, and made the only choice that made sense. "Helm, hard burn, bearing 315, Mark 12, get us into the debris field around the Kyoto's wreck. Tactical, prepare countermeasures. Kim, I want every scrap of power rerouted to the engines." We are not dying out here today. Captain, running from a fight, isn't that an order, Lieutenant? Elena's voice was hard as steel. We can't help the fleet by dying alongside it. If we survive, we can still matter. Move. The Valiant shuddered as her engines roared to life, throwing the ship into a tight, punishing turn. Elena was thrown against her harness as the cruiser knifed through open space toward the tumbling wreckage of the destroyer. Kyoto, a field of twisted metal and frozen debris large enough to hide a ship, if the pilot was good enough to thread the needle. Ensign Devon Okafor was good enough. Barely 23 years old, he had been flying combat ships for less than a year. But his hands moved across the controls with a precision that belied his age. The Valiant rolled and dove, weaving between chunks of hull plating and frozen coolant clouds, while behind them, the three Skarn cruisers opened fire. Beams of superheated plasma lanced through the dark, missing the Valiant by meters, vaporizing debris instead. The ship rocked from a near miss, alarms shrieking as shields absorbed the shockwave. Shields at 40%, the tactical officer called out. Almost there, Okafor muttered through gritted teeth, hands white-knuckled on the controls. Almost. The Valiant plunged into the heart of the debris field, and the Scar cruisers, unwilling to risk their own hulls in the wreckage, pulled up and broke off pursuit. For a moment, the bridge was silent, except for the ragged breathing of the crew and the groan of stressed metal outside the hull. We're clear, Okafor said, his voice shaking with relief. For now. Elena allowed herself one slow breath before turning her attention back to the tactical display. The battle outside continued, but the picture was getting worse by the second. More blue icons winking out, more Scar ships converging on the last pockets of human resistance. She watched, helpless, as the Ares Ascendant took a final massive hit that split the great ship in half, its wreckage tumbling silently into the dark. Nobody on the bridge said anything. There was nothing to say. The Battle of Meridian Reach lasted 6 hours in total, though for the humans fighting and dying in it, it felt much longer. By the end, the United Earth Fleet, once humanity's greatest achievement and last line of defense, existed only as debris and memory. 312 ships had entered the battle. None remained except for one. The Valiant drifted deep within the wreckage of the Kyoto. Engines cold, all non-essential systems powered down to minimize her heat signature. Elena had ordered radio silence the moment the last human ship went dark on the tactical display. There was no fleet left to coordinate with. There was only the question of survival. Damage report, she said quietly. Once she was sure the Skarn had moved on to sweep other sectors of the battlefield, Marcus Webb's voice came through the comm, tired and strained reactor stable, but barely. We took hits to secondary hull plating on decks 4 through 7. Life support is holding, but we lost most of our reserve oxygen when a line ruptured during that last maneuver. Weapon systems are at 60%. FTL drive, he paused. FTL drive is offline. Captain took a hit during the run. I can maybe get it working again, but it'll take days, not hours. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. Days? They didn't have days. Somewhere out there, the Skarn fleet was almost certainly regrouping, preparing to push toward Earth now that the last obstacle in their path had been cleared away. And here she was, captain of the only surviving human warship, stranded and crippled in the middle of a graveyard of her own people's dead. How many crew do we have left? She asked. 147, Kim answered from beside her. Out of an original complement of 210, 147 people. That was what remained of humanity's fighting strength in this sector of space. Elena thought about Earth, about the billions of people who had no idea yet that their entire fleet had just been annihilated. She thought about the Scar Hegemony and High Marshal Kesserin, whose reputation for ruthless efficiency had earned him a special kind of fear among human sailors. She thought about what would happen when word reached Earth that the Ares Ascendant was gone, that the fleet was gone, that there was nothing left standing between the home world and an enemy who had made it very clear over 6 long years that they intended to see humanity erased. Captain, Kim said gently, what are your orders? Elena opened her eyes. The bridge crew was watching her, exhausted, frightened, waiting for her to tell them what came next. She thought about giving the order to abandon ship to send out an escape pod distress beacon and hoped the Skarn didn't bother hunting down a single crippled cruiser. It would have been the reasonable choice, the safe choice. But she thought too about something her grandmother used to tell her back when Elena was a child, listening to stories about humanity's long history of wars fought and somehow survived. We have never once been the strongest. We have only ever been the most stubborn. We're not running, Elena said. We're not hiding forever either. We're going to fix this ship and then we're going to find a way to hurt them. Silence answered her. The kind of silence that came from people trying to process an idea too large to hold at once. Captain, the tactical officer said carefully. With respect, we're one ship, one damaged ship with no fleet, no support, no way home. What exactly do you think we can do against an entire hegemony war fleet? Elena stood up from her command chair and walked to the viewport, looking out at the drifting wreckage of the Kyoto, at the distant flare of Skarn engines moving away into the dark, at the stars beyond that had watched humanity lose everything today and would go on burning regardless of what happened next. I don't know yet, she admitted, but I know this. They think we're finished. They think Earth is defenseless and the war is basically over. That means they're not looking for us anymore. Nobody is hunting a ghost. She turned back to face her crew. We use that. We stay quiet. We get this ship working again. And we find a way to make them regret ever thinking humanity was done fighting. Marcus Webb's voice crackled through the calm again. And for the first time since the battle began, there was something other than exhaustion in it. Something like determination. Captain, if you want this ship flying and fighting again, I'm going to need every hand you can spare down here in engineering and probably a miracle. Then let's get you a miracle, Chief. Elena said, Kim, I want a full inventory of everything we've got. Weapons, supplies, spare parts, anything salvageable from the wreckage around us. If there's something useful floating in this graveyard, I want it brought aboard. We're not just going to survive out here. We're going to build something out of the wreckage that the Skarn never see coming. The crew began to move. Orders passing down through the ship. Exhausted bodies finding new energy in the face of a task that felt for the first time in hours like it might actually mean something. Down in engineering, Marcus Webb pulled himself along a service corridor slick with coolant fluid, a portable welding torch strapped to his back, and a tablet full of damage reports clutched in one hand. He was 51 years old, older than most of the crew by a decade or more, and he had served on human warships since before the war with the Skarn had even begun. He had seen ships die before. He had never expected to be the one keeping the last of them alive. Talk to me, he said to the young technician crouched beside the reactor housing, a woman named Priya Anand, who had graduated from the Fleet Academy less than 8 months earlier. Containment field is stable, Chief, but only just, Priya said, sweat beading on her forehead despite the chill of the compartment. We lost 2 of the primary coolant regulators in the last hit. If we push the reactor above 60% output, we risk a cascade failure. 60% isn't enough to run shields and weapons at the same time, Marcus muttered, half to himself. He looked at the tangle of damaged conduits, at the sparking relay panel someone had already jury-rigged with salvaged wire, and felt the familiar shape of a problem settling into his mind. Problems at least were something he understood. Problems could be solved with enough time, enough parts, and enough stubbornness. All right, here's what we're going to do. Pull the backup coolant regulators from the aft torpedo bay. We're not using half those torpedo tubes anyway with the damage to Bay 3. Reroute what's left of the reserve power through the auxiliary junction instead of the main trunk. It'll be slower, but it won't cook the core. That'll take hours, Chief. Then we'd better get started, Marcus said, already moving toward the torpedo bay. Because I have a feeling the captain is going to want this ship doing more than just sitting quietly in the dark. Throughout the ship, similar scenes played out in every section. Damage control team sealed hull breaches with whatever they could find. Salvaged plating pulled from the wreckage outside. Emergency sealant foam. In one case, a stack of storage crates welded directly over a 2-meter gash in the outer hull. Medical staff moved through the wounded, doing what they could with supplies that were already running low. And throughout it all, word spread quietly among the crew, about what had happened to the rest of the fleet, about the Ares Ascendant, about Admiral Reyes, about the 311 other ships that would never return home. Grief moved through the Valiant like a slow tide. But so did something else, a hard, quiet resolve that Elena recognized because she felt it, too. It was the particular kind of anger that came from having nothing left to lose. Elena found a moment alone 2 hours later, standing in the observation gallery near the ship's bow, watching the slow drift of wreckage outside the reinforced viewport. She had not told her crew everything that was on her mind. She had not told them, for instance, that she had grown up in a small coastal town in what used to be called Portugal, or that her mother had been a school teacher who died during the Scar's first bombardment of Earth's outer colonies 11 years ago, back before humanity even had a proper fleet to fight back with. She had not told them that she had joined the Earth Defense Forces at 18, not out of some grand sense of duty, but because she had wanted more than anything to make sure that no other child would lose a parent the way she had. 6 years of war had taught her that wanting something and being able to achieve it were very different things. She had watched good officers die, making impossible choices. She had watched entire colonies evacuated and some not evacuated in time. She had learned slowly and painfully that courage alone was not enough to win a war against an enemy with more ships, more resources, and more raw military might than humanity could ever hope to match. But she had also learned something else. Something that gave her a strange, stubborn hope even now. Staring out at a debris field full of the dead, she had learned that the Scarn, for all their strength, did not understand humans. Not really. Scar military doctrine was built on discipline, on overwhelming force applied with careful precision, on the assumption that a rational enemy would recognize when a battle was already lost and act accordingly. Humans did not always act rationally. Humans improvised. Humans found ways to keep fighting long after a sensible species would have surrendered. And more than once during this war, that unpredictability had cost the Scorn dearly. Even in a conflict humanity was ultimately losing. They think they understand us now, Elena thought, watching a piece of debris that might once have been part of the Ares Ascendant's hull tumble slowly past the viewport. They think we're broken, predictable, finished. She intended to prove them wrong. Behind her, the door to the observation gallery slid open, and Sarah Kim stepped inside, a tablet in hand and an expression on her face that suggested she had news, though Elena couldn't yet tell if it was good or bad. Captain Chief Webb says the reactor stabilized enough to bring shields back online at reduced capacity. It's not much, but it's something good, Elena said. What else? We finished the salvage inventory from the debris field. We recovered working weapon systems from at least 4 other wrecks, including a full spread of torpedoes from the Kyoto herself, and enough spare parts to make real repairs instead of just patches. We also, Kim hesitated. We also found survivors, Captain, 11 of them, in an escape pod that got thrown clear of the Osaka before she went down. They've been drifting dark, same as us, waiting for someone to come get them. Elena felt something tighten in her chest. A small and unexpected flare of hope in the middle of so much loss. Bring them aboard quietly. And Kim, good work. All of it. Captain, if I may ask, Kim said, lowering her voice even though there was no one else in the gallery to hear. What exactly is the plan here? We can patch this ship up, maybe even get her fighting fit again eventually. But we're still one cruiser against an entire hegemony invasion fleet. I believe in what you're trying to do. I just don't see how one ship changes anything. Elena turned from the viewport to look at her executive officer. And for a moment, she let herself think honestly about the question rather than simply offering reassurance. I don't know exactly how yet, she admitted. But I know the Scarn are about to make a mistake. They think this war is over. They think Earth has no defenses left, and that means they're going to get careless. Supply lines that aren't well guarded. Patrols that don't expect resistance. Commanders who stop watching their own backs because they think there's nothing left to watch for. She looked back out at the wreckage. One ship can't win a war by fighting fair, Kim. But one ship, moving quietly, hitting where it isn't expected, striking and vanishing before anyone even knows we were there. That ship can make an enemy that thinks it's already won start looking over its shoulder. That's not nothing. That might be everything if we're smart about it and if we're patient. Kim was quiet for a long moment, studying her captain's face. Then slowly, she nodded. The crew is going to want to hear that from you directly. All of them. Grief's already starting to set in below decks. And a plan, even a hard one, is better than nothing. Then let's give them one, Elena said. She thought about High Marshal Kesserin somewhere out there among the stars already reporting his victory to Hegemony Command. She thought about how confident he must be feeling right now. How certain that humanity's war was as good as over. Let him believe that, she thought. Let them all believe it. It will make what comes next hurt so much more. 3 light years away, aboard the Devourer of Stars, High Marshal Kesserin reviewed the final casualty reports from Meridian Reach with quiet satisfaction. 312 human ships destroyed. 0 hegemony losses beyond minor damage to a handful of cruisers. It was by any measure one of the most complete victories in the history of the war. Send word to Hegemony High Command, he ordered his communications officer. The human fleet has been destroyed. The path to their home world is open. Recommend we begin final preparations for the invasion of Earth within the month. Yes, High Marshal. Should we conduct a sweep of the battlefield first? Confirm there are no survivors among the human vessels. Kesserin considered the question for a moment, watching the debris field on his tactical display, the scattered wreckage of everything humanity had built to defend itself. Not necessary, he said finally. Nothing meaningful could have survived that battle. The humans are finished. Redirect the fleet toward staging position at the edge of the Sol system. Let us not waste further time on a war that is for all practical purposes already won. He turned away from the display, already thinking ahead to the invasion to come. Already certain that humanity's story was reaching its final chapter. He had no idea that somewhere in the wreckage he had just dismissed as meaningless. One ship and 147 people had just decided that the war was far from over. 3 days passed inside the wreckage of the Kyoto, and in that time, the UES Valiant changed. She was still a Hunter-class cruiser on paper, still listed in whatever remained of Earth's fleet records as a mid-sized warship built for speed and precision strikes. But the ship that emerged from those 3 days of frantic, quiet repair work, was something else entirely. Part warship, part scavenger, held together by salvaged parts, stubbornness, and the refusal of 158 people to accept that they were finished. The 11 survivors from the Osaka had settled in well given the circumstances. Among them was a weapons specialist named Shinlu, a broad-shouldered man in his 30s who had spent the war designing torpedo guidance systems before the fighting forced him into a gunner's seat instead. He had lost his entire team when the Osaka went down, and he carried that loss quietly, the way a lot of the crew carried their losses now, not forgotten, but folded away somewhere it wouldn't interfere with the work that needed doing. "Captain, you're going to want to see this," Chen said, standing at the tactical station on the bridge with a tablet in his hand. Elena crossed the deck to look over his shoulder. "What am I looking at?" "The torpedoes we salvaged from the Kyoto's wreck. Standard Fleet Issue Mark 9 torpedoes. 32 of them fully intact. But look at the guidance systems." Chen pulled up a schematic. The Kyoto was refit 6 months ago with an experimental targeting array, something the Fleet Research Division was testing before the war took a turn for the worse. And all the funding got redirected to just building more ships. The array never got approved for standard use, but it's here sitting in that wreck, and I know how it works because I helped design it. What does it do? Scar's shield technology relies on a rotating harmonic frequency to deflect incoming fire, Chen said. It's why our torpedoes usually need to land multiple hits before they punch through. The shield frequency shifts too fast for a standard guidance system to compensate. But this array can track and predict the frequency shift in real time. If I can get it integrated into our torpedo tubes, we could put a torpedo through a scar and shield on the first hit. Maybe even the first shot. Elena felt something shift in her chest. The particular kind of alertness that came from recognizing an opportunity in the middle of a desperate situation. How long would it take you to install it? 2 days, maybe 3, if I have help. It's delicate work and we don't have the right calibration equipment. I'd need to build some of it from scratch. You have whatever time and whatever hands you need, Elena said. Kim, reassign whoever Chen needs from damage control. This is priority. Kim nodded and moved to relay the order. And Elena allowed herself a rare small smile. It was the first genuinely good news the Valiant had received since the battle at Meridian Reach. And after 3 days of grinding repair work and quiet grief, the crew needed something to hold on to besides survival. Marcus Webb, meanwhile, had performed something close to a miracle of his own down in engineering. The reactor, once teetering on the edge of cascade failure, now ran at 75% capacity, stable and clean, thanks to a jury-rigged cooling system built from parts pulled off 4 different wrecks. The FTL drive remained offline. Its primary coil fractured beyond anything Marcus could repair without a proper shipyard. But the ship's sublight engines had been restored to full function, and more importantly, so had her weapons and shields. She'll never win a beauty contest again, Marcus told Elena during a status briefing in the ship's cramped wardrobe. Gesturing at a diagram of the Valiant hull covered in red patches, marking every repair and reinforcement. Half her hull plating is scavenged from 3 other ships, her portside sensor array is held together with wire and hope. And if you ask that reactor to run above 80% for more than 10 minutes at a stretch, I genuinely cannot promise you what happens next. But she flies, Captain. She fights. That's more than I thought I'd be able to say 3 days ago. And the FTL drive. Marcus shook his head. Without a shipyard, I can't fix it. I might be able to coax a short-range jump out of her in an emergency enough to get us somewhere safer if things go bad. But it would be a one-time thing, and it might tear the drive apart doing it until we find real facilities. We're a sublight ship, Captain. That means wherever we go slow. Elena absorbed this information, turning it over in her mind alongside everything else Chen had told her about the salvage targeting array. A ship without FTL was a ship confined to a single system, unable to strike quickly across long distances the way a proper warship needed to. But it was also, she realized, a ship that could hide more effectively within a system it knew intimately. And the Sol system with its asteroid belts, its gas giants, its countless moons and stations and shipping lanes was a system humanity knew better than any Skarn commander ever could. Then we stay close to home. Elena said, if the Skarn are staging for an invasion of Earth, that means their supply lines and patrol routes are going to run right through this system eventually. We don't need to chase the war across the galaxy. We let the war come to us. The plan that took shape over the following days was not a grand strategy for winning the war outright. Elena understood better than anyone aboard how absurd that idea would have been. One damaged cruiser, no matter how cleverly repaired, could not defeat the Skarn Hegemonys invasion fleet in open battle. What one damaged cruiser could do, if handled with patience and precision, was bleed that fleet slowly, cutting supply lines, destroying isolated patrols, striking hard, and vanishing before reinforcements arrived, and doing it again and again until an enemy that believed itself utterly victorious, began to understand that the war was in fact still being fought. We're not a warship anymore. Not really, Elena told her senior officers gathered around the small table in the wardroom. Not in the way the Ares Ascendant was a warship. We're something else now. A wolf instead of a bear. We can't stand toe-to-toe with them and win. So, we're not going to try. We hit them where they're weak. We hit them where they don't expect it. And then we disappear before they can respond. Every ship we take out, every supply convoy every patrol that doesn't report back, that's doubt. That's fear. And an invasion fleet that starts doubting itself, that starts looking over its shoulder instead of pressing forward with full confidence, moves slower, makes mistakes, gives Earth more time to prepare, if there's anyone left back home who even knows how badly we need that time. Which raises a question, Kim said. Do we even know if Earth knows what happened at Meridian Reach? Our comms haven't picked up any fleet-wide broadcast since the battle. For all we know, Earth Command still thinks the fleet is holding the line. It was a sobering thought, and one Elena had turned over in her own mind more than once during the long, quiet hours of repair work. If the Ares Ascendant's command deck had gone dark before any final report could reach Earth, and if no other ship had survived long enough to send word, then it was entirely possible that Earth had no idea its entire fleet was gone. No idea that an invasion force was staging at the edge of the system. No idea that the only thing standing between the Scar hegemony and humanity's home world was one crippled cruiser and 158 exhausted people. Then that's our first priority. Elena said before we strike anything, we need to get a message to Earth. They need to know what happened. They need time to prepare whatever defenses they can, even if it's not enough. And we need intelligence where the Scar fleet is staging, how many ships, what their invasion timeline looks like. We can't fight blind. Our long-range comms took damage in the battle, said the communications officer, a quiet young man named Diego Reyes. No relation, as far as anyone knew, to the admiral who had died aboard the Ares Ascendant, though the coincidence had struck more than one member of the crew as strange. I can boost the signal, but broadcasting anything strong enough to reach Earth from this distance risks giving away our position. If there are any Skarn ships within a few light hours, they'll pick up the transmission. Then we find a way to send it that doesn't give us away. Elena said, get creative, Reyes. I don't care how you do it. Bounce it off a relay satellite, encode it in a compressed burst, disguise it as background noise if you have to. I want a message reaching Earth within the week, and I want it to reach them without telling the Skarn where to find us. While Reyes worked on the communications problem and Chen continued installing the salvage targeting array into the Valiant torpedo tubes, Elena turned her attention to reconnaissance. If the ship was going to strike the Skarn fleet supply lines, she needed to know where those supply lines actually ran. And that meant getting eyes on Skarn movements without being seen herself. She found her answer in Enenifer, the young pilot who had flown the Valiant into the debris field during the battle. Okafor had grown up on a mining station in the asteroid belt before joining the fleet, and he knew the terrain of the outer Sol system in a way that no amount of academy training could replicate. There's a shipping route the mining companies used before the war, Okafor explained, pulling up a star chart on the Brigig's main display. Runs along the edge of the belt, past a string of old refueling stations that got abandoned when the fighting started. If the Skarn are staging an invasion fleet at the edge of the system, there's a good chance they're using some variation of this route to move supplies and reinforcements because the terrain gives good cover from long-range sensors, and any halfway competent fleet logistics officer would recognize that. Can you get us close enough to observe without being detected? Okafor studied the star chart for a long moment before answering. I think so. There's an old station here, Kestrel Station they used to call it before the mining company that ran it went under years back. It's derelict now, but the structure is still intact and it sits right on that shipping route. If we could get the Valiant tucked in close behind it, using the station's hull to mask our own sensor signature, we could watch that route for days without anyone knowing we were there. Do it, Elena said. Set a course. Quiet as you can manage. We move at half power, minimal signature, and we watch. The Valiant left the wreckage of the Kyoto 4 days after the Battle of Meridian Reach, moving slow and dark through the debris-strewn edges of the Sol system toward Kestrel Station. It was not the triumphant departure of a warship riding into battle. It was something quieter and in its own way more dangerous. A wounded predator moving carefully through unfamiliar territory, watching, waiting, gathering strength before it struck. Elena stood on the bridge as the ship moved, watching the stars slide past the viewport, thinking about the message Reyes was still working to send, about the 11 survivors from the Osaka who had begun to find their place among the crew. About Chen's salvage targeting array slowly taking shape in the torpedo bay. About Marcus and his team keeping the reactor stable through sheer force of will. 158 people aboard one damaged ship, moving quietly through the dark toward an enemy that believed the war was already over. She thought about High Marshal Kesserin and wondered what he was doing at that moment, whether he was already celebrating a victory he did not yet realize was incomplete. She thought about Earth, still ignorant of everything that had happened, still going about its business under the mistaken belief that a fleet still stood between it and annihilation. And she thought, with a grim and quiet determination that had settled into her chest sometime during those 3 long days of repair work, that the Scar Hegemony was about to learn something important about the species it had just declared defeated. Humanity did not need to be the strongest force in the galaxy to be dangerous. It only needed one ship, one crew, and enough stubbornness to refuse a war that everyone else had already declared finished. Approaching Kestrel Station, Captain Okafor reported quietly. Beginning approach vector now. If there's scone traffic on that shipping route, well, know within the hour. Good, Elena said, settling into her command chair, her eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. Let's go see what our enemy's been doing while they thought no one was watching. The bridge fell into a tense, focused silence as the Valiant crept toward the derelict station. Every system dialed down to its quietest setting. Every crew member aware that the next hour would tell them whether their plan had any chance of working at all. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their slow, indifferent burn, unaware that somewhere in their light, a wounded ship was about to begin the long, dangerous work of turning a lost war into something that still might be won. Kestrel Station drifted into view an hour later, a hulking ring of rusted metal and dark viewports. Its rotation long since stopped, its mining arms frozen in place, like the limbs of some enormous dead insect. It had been abandoned for nearly a decade, ever since the war made asteroid mining in this sector too dangerous to justify the cost. And in the years since, it had become exactly the kind of forgotten place that made for good cover. Bring us in behind the station's main hub, Elena ordered. Match her old rotation as best you can, Okafor. I want our hull profile blending into hers as much as possible. Copy that, Captain. Okafor's hands moved carefully over the controls, easing the Valiant into position with the same precision he had shown during the desperate run through the debris field days earlier. Slowly, the cruiser slid into the shadow of the derelict station. Her engines throttled down to the barest minimum needed to hold position. Her sensor array angled to watch the old shipping lane without broadcasting so much as a whisper of her own presence. We're in position, Okafor said finally. Passive sensors only from here, Captain. Unless you want us lit up like a beacon. Passive only, Elena agreed. Reyes, keep working on that message to Earth. Chen, how's the targeting array coming? Slow but steady, Captain. Chen's voice came back over the comm from the torpedo bay. I've got the first 2 tubes recalibrated. Give me another day, and I should have all 8 of them running the new array. Take the time you need. Better it works right than works fast. For the next several hours, the bridge crew settled into the strange, patient rhythm of watching and waiting. Elena had commanded ships before, had led boarding actions and fleet engagements and desperate defensive stands, but she had never before commanded a ship whose entire purpose for the moment was simply to sit quietly in the dark and observe. It was a different kind of tension than combat, slower and more grinding, the kind that wore at people's nerves in ways a firefight never did, because there was no release for it, no moment of action to burn off the fear. She used the time to walk the ship. Something she had not had the chance to do properly since the battle at Meridian Reach. She found Priya on and asleep at her post in engineering. Exhaustion finally catching up to the young technician after days of non-stop repair work. And rather than wake her, Elena simply pulled a spare jacket from a nearby locker and draped it over the woman's shoulders before moving on. She found 2 of the Osaka survivors, a married couple named Tomas and Ingrid Halverson, sitting together in the mess hall, not eating, just holding hands and staring at nothing. And she sat with them for a few minutes without saying much of anything, because sometimes the only thing a captain could offer her crew was the simple fact of her presence. She found Marcus Webb in the observation gallery of all places, standing where she herself had stood days earlier, looking out at the stars. "Couldn't sleep, Chief. Reactor stable for the first time in days," Marcus said without turning around. "Didn't know what to do with myself, so I came up here." He was quiet for a moment. "You know, I served on the Kyoto once years back before she was reassigned to Admiral Reyes's battle group. Good ship, good crew. Strange being surrounded by her wreckage now using her parts to keep another ship alive. Does it bother you?" Marcus considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things. "No," he said finally. "I think she'd have wanted it that way. If a ship can want anything, better her parts keep fighting than rust away out here forever. Better something good comes out of all this loss if we can manage it." Elena thought about that for a long time after she left him there alone with his memories and the stars. The first sign of Skarn activity came 2 days later in the deep hours of the ship's overnight watch when a soft alert chimed at the sensor station and pulled the duty officer's attention sharply upward. "Captain, contact," the officer said. And within minutes, Elena was on the bridge, still pulling on her uniform jacket, studying the sensor readout with sharp, focused attention. "Talk to me," she said. 3 ships moving along the old shipping lane bearing consistent with the projected route toward the system's edge. The tactical officer reported configuration reads as Skarn design. Looks like a light escort pattern. 1 larger vessel likely a supply hauler flanked by 2 smaller ships, probably patrol cruisers. Elena studied the readout herself, watching the 3 icons crawl slowly across the display, exactly where Okafor had predicted a supply convoy might travel. It was, in its own quiet way, a small vindication, proof that their reasoning about Scar logistics had been correct, that a wounded ship with good instincts and better intelligence could still see clearly in the middle of a war that had gone badly wrong. "Passive tracking only," she ordered. "I want a full profile on those ships. Speed, armament, shield configuration, everything Chen's targeting array can pull from a distance. We are not engaging yet. We watch, we learn, and we let them pass." It went against every instinct in her body to let an enemy convoy sail past unmolested. But Elena understood the discipline the situation required. A single strike, however satisfying, would be worth nothing if it revealed the Valiant's presence and position before the ship was truly ready to fight. Better to watch this convoy and the next and the one after that, building a complete picture of Skarn supply routes and patrol schedules until the moment came to strike with a precision that would leave the enemy reeling rather than merely annoyed. The convoy passed within 800,000 kilometers of Kestrel Station without ever detecting the ship hiding in its shadow, and Elena watched it go with a patience that caused her more effort than she let show on her face. "Log everything," she told the tactical officer once the Scar ships had moved out of sensor range. "Ship classes, weapon loadouts, shield frequencies, travel speed, everything. We're building a map here, and every piece of data makes the picture clearer by the end of the week." That map had grown considerably. For more convoys had passed along the shipping lane along with 2 smaller patrol craft moving on a tighter, more predictable schedule. Reyes had finally succeeded in compressing a message to Earth into a burst transmission disguised within the natural background static of a nearby pulsar. A trick he was fairly confident would slip past Skarn's sensor nets without drawing attention. Though there was no way to know for certain whether the message would actually be received and understood on the other end. Chen had finished installing the salvage targeting array into all 8 of the Valiant torpedo tubes and had spent an additional 2 days running simulations to confirm the system worked as promised. "It's ready, Captain," Chen reported during a final briefing in the wardroom. The whole senior staff gathered around the table. "Assuming the simulations hold up against real Scar and shields, we should be able to punch through their defenses with a single torpedo hit instead of the 3 or 4 it normally takes. And the patrol schedule? Elena asked, turning to the tactical officer. Consistent for the past week, Captain. There's a smaller convoy due through this route in approximately 30 hours. 2 escort ships and a supply hauler, lighter than the others we've observed. If we're going to test this equipment against a real target, that's about as good an opportunity as we're likely to get. Elena looked around the wardrobe at her crew. Marcus, exhausted but steady. Chen, quietly confident in the work of his hands. Kim, sharp and watchful as always. Okafor, young but no longer quite so green as he had been a week earlier. Reyes, hopeful that his message had found its way home. 158 people aboard one wounded ship about to test whether patience and ingenuity could accomplish what raw strength alone could not. Then that's our target, Elena said. 30 hours. Get some rest if you can, because after this there's no going back to hiding quietly in the dark. Once we strike, the Skarn are going to know something's out here. We'd better make that first strike count. 30 hours passed slowly aboard the UES Valiant. The way time always seemed to slow down before a fight, stretching each minute into something heavier than it should have been. Elena spent most of it reviewing the tactical plan with her senior officers, running through every possible variation of what might go wrong and trying without much success to get some real sleep in the few hours she allowed herself away from the bridge. The plan itself was simple, at least in its outline. The Skarn convoy, 2 escort cruisers and a supply hauler, would pass along the shipping lane close to Kestrel Station, following the same route every previous convoy had taken over the past week. The Valiant would remain hidden until the convoy was within optimal firing range, then strike fast and hard, using Chen's modified torpedoes to punch through Skarn shields on the first hit, rather than the 3 or 4 hits it would normally take. The goal was not simply to win the engagement, but to win it quickly and decisively, disabling or destroying the escort ships before they could mount an effective defense, then dealing with the supply hauler at their leisure. The escorts are the real threat, Chen explained during the final briefing, pulling up tactical schematics on the wardroom's display. Standard Scar patrol cruisers, moderate shields, decent point defense against torpedoes, but nothing that should stop the modified guidance array from finding its mark. If we can take out both escorts in the opening volley, the supply hauler is lightly armed and shouldn't pose much of a threat on its own. And if the modified array doesn't perform the way the simulations predict, Kim asked, ever the voice of careful skepticism, then we fall back on standard tactics, Elena said. We hit hard, we hit fast, and if things go wrong, we run. I am not losing this ship or this crew over one convoy, no matter how good the intelligence value might be. We test the array. We see what it can do, and we adjust from there. Understood? A murmur of agreement passed around the table, and Elena studied the faces of her officers, people who 2 weeks ago had been part of a fleet numbering in the hundreds, and who now found themselves the entirety of humanity's active military resistance in this sector of space. It was a heavy weight to place on so few shoulders, and Elena felt it every time she looked at them. But she also saw something else in their faces now that had been harder to find in the